My name's Abigail, and you're listening to Absolutely Me. Welcome to another episode of Absolutely Me. I am very excited today because I'm here with my amazing Aunt Melanie, and we have been wanting to get together and do this for a little bit, so I'm very excited to have you here, Melanie. And I just wanted to have her give a little introduction of herself first, and then we can kind of talk about why it is I'm interviewing you and what we're going to be talking about.
Okay. Hi, well, thanks for having me. This is very exciting.
I am very excited.
So, yes, I am your Aunt Melanie. I am your mom's little sister.
Yes.
I'm the littlest sister in the family. And there's a fairly big age gap between me and your mom.
Yeah.
There's like 7 years. So, and then that puts us at 16 years, we found out.
Yeah, 16.
Age gap of 16 years. For us. And let's see, I live in Salt Lake. I've lived in Salt Lake in about a mile radius of all the places I've lived for about 20 years here. So I'm pretty comfortable in my neighborhood.
Yeah, she's got an awesome neighborhood. She lives right up by the Capitol.
Yeah. But I'm moving soon, so that'll be an adjustment.
Yes.
So. Let's see, I grew up in Bountiful, went to Viewmont.
Same high school that I went to.
Yeah. It looked very different when I went than when you went, but...
It looks different even now than when I went.
Oh, really?
It looks completely different now, yeah.
Yeah, I haven't been back in a long time, so kind of preserving my memory. But, let's see, so what I do for work is I work in a photo studio. I'm a set stylist. So I work with art directors and set builders to create an environment. And then I put things in it, and a photographer comes and takes pictures. And then we take it all down and do it again and again and again for the rest of my life. No, just kidding. I hope not.
It's a good job for you, though.
It is. It's very dynamic, and I like doing it. So, and then I'm also trained as a death doula. So, getting my feet wet with that, and So that's kind of a brief rundown on me.
Yes.
We'll get into it.
Brief elevator pitch on Melanie.
A little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm very excited to have Melanie here. Her and I have always had a really special relationship, I think, because our ages are, like, we're pretty close in age for an aunt and a niece, I feel like. And so, I don't know, do you feel like we've always had a pretty good relationship, Mel?
Yeah. Well, and you, my other siblings, like, when the kids were young, they were all out of state doing things. So you lived really close to me growing up. So when you were born, I was 16 years old, and loved having a niece. And my grandma was babysitting you when the night I went to senior prom, and you're in some of my prom pictures.
That's right. Yeah.
You were like 2 years old, maybe 1.5, and there's a really cute picture of you on my hip, and
we recreated that picture for my senior prom too.
We did. Maybe we'll have to post that.
I know we should. Melanie came and helped me with my makeup, and I had a picture of her on my hip.
Yes.
In my dress. It's a pretty good photo.
So I think, like, vicinity helped us be a little bit closer and have a different relationship than with some of the other some of my other nieces and nephews. But, yeah.
I think, I just remember, like, because you've just always been around, like, more than a lot of my aunts and uncles, because I like, don't remember being super young and, like, going over to grandma's, but I just, like, remember you always being around more.
Mm-hmm.
And you would babysit us a lot. Like, when my parents would go out of town, you would come over and stay at our house with us, which was super fun.
Mm-hmm.
And I just feel like we always have had, like, a special relationship, and, like, it's always been, I feel like I've never seen you as, like, different than other people. And I feel like at some points maybe you felt like I was a little less judgmental towards you than maybe some other family members. I remember one time you told me, you're like, you've just always been my little buddy, like, you just always loved me no matter what, and, like, you just always have, like, been my little friend. And I've always remembered that and thought that was really special.
Aw, I love that. Yeah. Well, I think our closeness too is, like, I've remained single, and, like, I don't have a family of my own, so, like, I've been just kind of floating through your childhood and adulthood, like, not really wrapped up in, like, having my own family as much. So it's, I don't know how to describe it. But
I think that's true. I think that's true too. But I wanted to have Melanie on the podcast today because I've had a lot of requests of people asking me to talk about faith transitions and kind of like faith crises and relationships with your family, specifically with leaving the Mormon church. And Melanie has been kind of the resident expert in my life on that for most of my life. And so I wanted Melanie to be able to come on here and talk about her experience and just her journey through faith, and where she started, and her kind of faith crisis, if you want to call it that, and transitioning and figuring out what you believe and kind of where you are now. So, Melanie, if you wanted, I just wanted to start talking about just your experience with, like, religion when you were little and what you remember about that in your life when you were little.
Yeah. I look back on my childhood very fondly. Like, I feel like I have a lot of good memories, and a lot of those include being a part of the church. I was part of the LDS religion up until my 20s, and I had a blast. I grew up in a really great neighborhood where there were a ton of kids around. My age, a little older, a little younger, there was just so many of us, and I grew up in a good neighborhood in the 80s and 90s, and it was a good time to be a kid, in my experience. Just a lot of fun memories around church gatherings. I lived across the street from the church, so, and a lot of good, clean fun, if you can say, like, but I was also very, let's see, my personal relationship with the church was that, like, I was a really spiritual kid. I loved going to church. I loved hearing church stories. I used to fall asleep to these dramatized church history tapes.
Oh yeah, like the Living Scriptures.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, while I didn't, like, read the scriptures a lot, I wasn't an incredibly good reader and had a lot of insecurities around that. I knew these stories, like, really well, and I could talk about them in Sunday school and, like, give my opinion and, like, raise my hand and kind of go toe-to-toe with some of these other, sounds silly, just like kids. You know, we were
you were dueling it out.
Yeah, we were discussing
Sunday school.
scripture at a young age. And I think for that reason, like, I gained a lot of wonderful things being associated with a church that helped me feel comfortable standing up in front of people and speaking, and I enjoyed bearing my testimony. I enjoyed giving talks. I enjoyed talking with people about the meaning of things, and that's kind of continued all through my life. As far as talking about meaning, contemplating why people do the things they do, talking about metaphor and stories that are more than just stories, So it did lay a really great foundation for me. Got a little tricky as I got older.
Yeah.
But yeah, when I was young, it was a really big part of my life, and I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. When you were a teenager, how old were you when your dad passed away?
I was 15.
Do you think that played any part in, do you remember that in your life having an impact on your view of religion at all when he passed away?
Not really. I have some thoughts around his passing and his illness, and the way that culturally I was raised to think about that, and my grief. But at the time I just kind of did what I knew, and it's been kind of a journey to look back on that period of time and try and sort out what I was even feeling at 15 years of age. Like, that time in your life is really tricky anyway, and my dad had Alzheimer's and was showing small signs starting when I was only 6 years old.
Yeah.
And so majority of my life up until he died was him being sick. And so that being part of a religion at that time was good in a lot of ways, because there was a huge support system behind my family and my mom, and I've come to an understanding of why people really need to lean on a higher power in times of crisis. And I know I have a compassionate heart around, even though my mom and I don't see things the same way entirely anymore, I understand why she holds on to her faith so much. It's because it got her through some really tough times.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I think as teenagers, like you said, it is really difficult to kind of sort out your feelings, and I didn't have anything nearly that big of an event happen in my life like you did when you were a teenager, but even when I was a teenager, I remember just things. I was trying to sort out my feelings about religion when I was a teenager, and there was already, for me, questions coming up and things that I felt like I was having a hard time wrapping my mind around or reconciling within myself. And I think at teenage is when I really started wrestling with a lot of things to do with religion. Do you think that your teenage years was when you started doing that, or you said maybe later in your 20s?
Yeah, no, I was pretty, I kind of just I accepted a lot of things.
Yeah.
I feel like the questions that I had answers to them, from the church that I just accepted and I didn't question. I think part of it was that I just had not experienced enough in life. The internet did not exist.
Yeah.
I didn't have a lot of access, and I wasn't necessarily seeking to have answers to a lot of these questions quite yet. It wasn't until I got into college, I started playing with the idea of flexing my autonomy, and experimenting and doing what I think is pretty normal for a lot of kids to do once they leave the nest and leave home for the first time. I was seeing a broader world. I had I had cable TV, and I spent hours in front of it absorbing culture and from music and videos, and I'm a very visual person. I'm a very visual learner.
Yeah.
And I what I do for a living is a very visual thing, and I started to create an aesthetic for myself. I started to learn what fashion was. I started to really like I say, absorb a lot of things that I didn't have access to, and so I think naturally alternative lifestyles started to kind of come into vision, and I wanted to play with try that on, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I left home was when I first kind of started thinking differently about some of those things, but still not incredibly consciously. It was all very unconscious, I think.
Yeah, I mean, growing up in Bountiful, where you grew up, in Centerville, where I grew up, it's kind of, you're in such a bubble of everyone kind of dresses the same, everyone looks the same, everyone kind of does the same things, listen to the same music, and now a little bit more, like you said, because there is more access and there's internet and social media and all that stuff, it's getting a little bit more diverse. But even when I was in high school, everyone was the same. So I kind of remember the same thing, when I left home for the first time and moved out, and I was getting exposed to people who were different from me, and not even and it wasn't even that super extreme from what I was used to even when I went to college, but it was just people who grew up differently than I did, and I just saw different ways of living and different, I met people from all over the world at school, and people from different states, and people who were religious and not religious, and that really burst my bubble a lot. And I think same as you, those different alternative lifestyles just kind of came into my vision, and I was like, oh, that's interesting, I wonder what this is like, or that really resonates with me a lot.
Yeah, it wasn't until I started feeling some kind of discontentment with my life, and I feel like my spiritual journey is tied into or runs pretty tandem with my mental health journey as well. And it was when I started kind of struggling in college with my identity, and I think there were things bubbling up from my childhood that and the grief of losing my father, and just helping be a caretaker to my adult father as a child, were starting to kind of bubble up, and I didn't know how to deal with them. I probably should have been going to therapy as a teen, but that just wasn't a normalized thing back then, or it wasn't as much of an obvious thing as it is now. And so when I started to kind of feel struggle in those ways, that's when I kind of started to question things, and so yeah.
Do you remember if you ever reached out to anybody about your questions? Did you ever talk to your mom or friends or anybody about things?
Well, and here's the thing too, is it took a long time for me to separate some things in my life. Like,
Yeah.
when I started kind of being exposed to different lifestyles and kind of wanting to try those things on, a lot of it was trying to come to some sort of understanding around my personal identity.
Yeah.
And like trying to know who I was and how I wanted to show up in the world, and also kind of to fit in. Like, it felt like I was trying on different hats of like, am I this person, am I this person? I would, and meeting people and being in groups of friends with different people in college, like you end up kind of bouncing around a lot because you're living in different places. You're coming home from summer,
Yeah.
for summers.
Yeah.
And so a lot of it was based around lifestyle at first, and but because I had been such a spiritual and like committed Mormon in my youth, like I still had that like testimony.
Yeah.
But I also I felt like I was in this battle between doing what felt authentic to discovering who I was.
Yeah.
And living this straight-lined life.
Yeah.
That told me who I was. And so I constantly felt like I was abandoning myself, whichever one I chose. So in large part, my 20s was going back and forth between what I think was my authentic self and living the standards of the church. And I kind of didn't feel good in either place because I somehow felt like I was betraying a part of myself, whichever side of the fence I landed on.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I was in my late 20s and I met a guy that I dated for years, and he had left the church when he was 17, but also had been very devout up until then, but he had access to literature that questioned and informed his questions, and he decided for himself he no longer believed, and so when we met, he was atheist, and it gave me kind of a place that I felt safe to ask questions and get answers from someone who I trusted and who had like source references for these things. And he was someone that I never felt like he was trying to make me think a certain way. It was just more
he was like willing to have the discussions with you.
Yeah, he was at my access point
to
a lot of these things. And he was like, oh, well, if you want to learn more about that, like, here is a book on that subject, or here is this. And so it got me back into a place of, which I appreciated, where it's like I wasn't being told what to think.
Yeah.
I was able to kind of discover that for myself, and I think that's ultimately kind of what broke this spell that, where, and I call it, I lost my faith, which was honestly probably the best gift that could have been given to me, because I could truly step into the life that I think I was meant to be in without feeling shame or that I was doing anything wrong. Whereas I didn't have that before. I struggled with a lot of shame and a lot of guilt. And when things would go wrong in my life that were just naturally occurring, or if a guy I was dating or a boy that I liked didn't call me back or pursue things, I would round that up to me not being worthy, and me and like almost like God punishing me for my sins.
Yeah.
Which is a tormented way to be living, because shit happens all the time.
Yeah.
You know, there's no way to avoid it. And it doesn't necessarily mean anything.
Yeah, well, I can see that too, because all of your siblings got married pretty young too. Mm-hmm. And so I can see how you would probably be feeling like you're in your later 20s and you're not like progressing in the same way maybe you saw your siblings progress. And so I'm sure that was hard, and that took a big toll on you too. Just wondering, like, why is God punishing me? Like, why can't I just have this normal progression like the rest of my family?
Yeah. Why does no one want to marry me?
Yeah. Yeah.
But I also am so grateful no one ever wanted to marry me.
Yeah.
Because I probably would have said yes.
Yeah. Hindsight is good, right? And I think, yeah, it's so interesting to me, like, when I hear about people's kind of disillusionment stories with the church, that I feel like there's kind of two different paths people that I know take. And one of them is, like, with you, where they're kind of battling between, this is the person I want to be, and this is the person I'm told I'm supposed to be. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of that back and forth. And there's not necessarily any kind of, like, doctrinal things that are rubbing them the wrong way necessarily at first, or there's not, like, it's not even necessarily that. It's more just battling, I think, within yourself and your spirit, being pulled between these two different lifestyles and feeling, like you said, guilty between wanting to live who you feel like you were supposed to be and wanted to be, and that was just the fighting in your head all the time. And then the other way I feel like is people have maybe less of a testimony than you probably did, and just that it never really, like, clicked in their head with them, the things that they were being taught. And just from people I've talked to, different doctrine points maybe just never made sense to them. Like, the stories they were being told just never really resonated with them at all. And then they found different doctrinal things or different church history things that rubbed them the wrong way, and that was what kind of pushed them out the door. So I just think it's interesting hearing different people's journeys, because everybody's just so different. And, like, the disillusionment, I think this, like what you said about the spell breaking, is it's kind of interesting to me too in my faith journey, as I feel like the spell has kind of been wiping away from my eyes a little bit, and just being able to kind of take a step back and look at things from a broader perspective, and having people that you can bounce questions or ideas off of that aren't making you feel like you have to believe a certain way, or that, you know, like you said with the guy you were dating. I think that's so valuable. And I think even people in the church can maybe be that a little bit more for people in their lives, and that would be, I don't know how to have people be able to do that, because people are very, like, strict in their adherence. But I think that if people could have more open discussions like that, and maybe a little bit less judgment and a little bit less pressure to live a certain way, it would open a lot of doors for a lot of people.
Absolutely. And it's like, you're gonna find those kind of people, those kind of strict, hard-lined, black or white, lacking nuance people everywhere.
Yeah.
Every religion, like, we're seeing that in movements across the country. Fanaticism is fanaticism, whichever way it's pointed.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that, to your point, the more we can practice just open-hearted, open-minded conversations where we're not trying to be right, or we're not trying to change someone's mind.
Yeah.
Like, the more productive we're going to be. And there's actually, like, there is studies out there with people who, it's like, if you come at them with from a certain angle, all it does is have them dig their heels in more with what they believe, instead of being open to having a discussion.
Yeah.
And I've thought a lot about, like, there was a phrase going around a lot in 2020 that I think can be applied in a lot of different ways, but it's like, it said something along the lines of normalize changing your mind when you receive new information.
Yeah.
And I've decided for myself too that, like, I have grown and changed my mind and evolved there's been so many different versions of me.
Yeah.
And I don't know that ends. I don't know that, like, and if it does, if you get so stagnant in what you believe and, like, what you, like, I think that's a shame.
Mm-hmm.
And, isn't it beautiful that we get to, like, experience life and have, and as we get older, like, gather all of this information and let that inform an unfolding in us that doesn't ever have to stop. Like, we don't ever have to stop learning or, like, putting ourselves in other people's shoes or just I just think it's a shame when we get too black and white, and I think ultimately that's my biggest qualm with organized religion is their claims of holding the one truth.
Yeah.
And being the only truth and being right, and that there's good and there's evil and there's so much in between. Like, yes, those extremes exist, but there's so much in between that, and I dare say that that's where most of us reside.
Yeah. Is in the gray.
Yeah, and we want to be seen there, and so but yeah, that's ultimately, I think that's my biggest frustration with these religions is taking people who are so complex and shaped in so many different beautiful ways,
yeah,
and saying that you need to fit this one thing. And I think that was what was troubling me, maybe unconsciously, in the earlier stages of that. I was told my whole life that this path, this very linear path,
yeah,
is what brings you happiness.
Yeah.
And I was on that path for a long time, but it was the moment that I ever so slightly deviated, that, well, I don't know if it's that. I was on that path, and I got far enough down it, and I was not feeling, like I was told to be, that I would feel,
Yeah.
I was feeling quite disturbed with myself.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, it messes with your head when you're told this is the way, but it feels so not good in your body.
You're almost like fighting against the grain.
Yeah, you're fighting against a current, you
Yeah.
know? And, so.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think I know a lot of people feel very similarly to that. And so I think that's a good point of circling back to like what we said about, feeling that there was that pull in you of wanting to not let yourself down and live authentically, but also feeling like you were supposed to live a very certain way, and just kind of that fight. Can you tell me a little bit about when you like finally decided that you were going to leave the church and what that experience was like?
Yeah. I was probably about 29 years old, and like I said, I'd been back and forth. I had there were times when I was going to the temple and doing baptisms for the dead, and I felt good for a while because I felt like I had made a choice and I was living in integrity in that choice.
Yeah.
You know? So it felt good for a while. And then eventually things would start kind of coming to a head. And so I had been bouncing back and forth, but I was about 29, and like I had kind of just at some point gathered enough information that I was like, and like I said, I just felt like I am not doing anything wrong. Like, this is actually not true. It's not true.
Yeah.
And that means like I'm not doing anything wrong by not being a part of it.
Yeah.
And it was so liberating. It was so it was just such a relief to not have that weight on my shoulders. And what has felt difficult is that, like, because I was playing that game almost the entirety of my 20s, of going back and forth and like trying to just going back and forth, I felt like I was always just moving side to side, and there was very little momentum forward.
Yeah.
So like, as opposed to other people who kind of got on like a good track and like went with it, I felt so stunted. I felt so just immature in a lot of ways, because I felt a bit robbed of some things. Because I wasn't able to make that forward momentum that I actually did finally feel when I left the church. And in my beginning of my 30s, it felt like I had been reborn.
Yeah, that totally makes sense.
So, yeah.
Just do you remember, like, did you ever have to have any like difficult conversations like with your family members about it?
Yeah, I did. I had a few, and I was really kind of starting to create some boundaries at a certain point. So when I did finally leave, I was like, this is not true. I kind of went more like the science and atheist route.
Yeah. Which I think is pretty common for people to swing like to kind of the complete opposite pendulum.
Totally. I needed to wipe the slate completely clean. And also there was a sense of somewhat betrayal there, where it was just like, if this is not true, like if Mormonism was not true, I couldn't believe that Christianity was true.
Yeah. And
so I needed to really kind of abandon all of that, and wipe the slate clean. What I didn't know then, but I know now, is it was then a rebuilding of what spirituality looked like for me. But yeah, I was atheist for several years, but you know, the family, I have a complex relationship with my family.
Yeah.
For many reasons. The lifestyle differences and me not being part of the Mormon church, probably one of the biggest ones, and the biggest challenge in my relationship with my family, because they, like you said, they all got married, they all started having kids. I don't think they had any concept of what I was actually going through.
It's hard for them to relate.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then my mom, being the person that she is, who is extremely spiritual, her life is governed by her relationship with the church.
Yeah.
And everything, in my experience, everything is seen through that lens for her. And so it made for very hard conversations, and often, like, I mean, I was like in my mid to late 20s when I was really kind of having these conversations. I was still kind of a kid, and I had these older siblings who I kind of felt ganged up by, because they couldn't relate. They were older than me. They were able to, I wasn't able at that time to fully put together, like, these kind of arguments, you know? Like, I didn't know cognitively enough what was happening in me to talk about it in a way that they would have been able to understand. And they were young too.
Yeah.
They were inexperienced.
Yeah.
And to their credit, a lot of them have made, like, some really great strides in understanding my experience now that they've had kids that are have gone through or are going through similar journeys.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So, and I imagine too, like, because like you said, you were so much younger, even especially from your oldest brother,
Mm-hmm.
that it was probably, like you said, it just didn't have the vocabulary at the time to be able to express kind of all the things you were going through. And I feel like it's hard in the moment when you're processing everything, you're trying to, you know, differentiate your feelings from each other and kind of separating things out and really, like, taking inventory of your feelings. It's really hard to express that to people when you're, like, going through the thick of it too.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes a long time, I think, to even be able to express the feelings that you're going through as well.
Absolutely. Like, I didn't know, all through my 20s, I didn't know what was happening.
Yeah.
In hindsight, I can talk about it in the way that I can because I have the advantage of hindsight.
Yeah.
And, but at the time, I just thought I was everything that people were telling me I was.
Yeah.
I thought I was, just, kind of a bad person who was being manipulative and just doing things because it felt good, and, like, and a Jezebel, and like, I had these stories in my head that I knew very well from my childhood, and I was suddenly knew that from their perspective, from their eyes, I was now one of the people in the high tower laughing at the holy people.
Yeah.
You know, like, I took that stuff on to my identity, and it was, it really messed with me.
Yeah.
Because I knew I wasn't that person.
Yeah.
Like, or I thought I did, but because, like, the people in my life, the people who actually were the ones that were supposed to know me the best, those were the stories that were, and maybe I was projecting, like, but because I knew how I had seen people too when I was younger.
Yeah.
That I I felt like I had a pretty good gauge on how I was now being seen. And I didn't have enough sense of self yet to be able to refute that.
Yeah.
So I did take that on of like, maybe I am that.
Well, I'm sure that like caused a lot of shame for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like I'm sure probably a lot of guilt. And like that you were, from what it sounds like letting people down in your life that you like really looked up to and really like wanted to please.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm sure that was really difficult.
Yeah, it was. Thank you
for
saying that. I think we all want to belong, you know?
Oh, of course, yeah.
And it is in us to be a part of a village.
Yeah.
And it's one thing to step away from the church and lose that community. But it's another thing to grapple with the reality of you living your authentic life then cuts you off from your village.
Yeah.
Like, your family, the people that, like, that is deadly. That will...
Yeah.
That kills people to be that cut off.
Yeah.
And so it's a hard choice to make. I get why some people don't make it.
Yeah. In the early stages, your relationship with your family was really difficult, just as you were leaving and as you were grappling with those things and being worried that the way that your family was seeing you was cutting you off and not really who you felt like you were deep down. And you said you like swung kind of to atheist for a while, and I'm sure there was a lot more contention in that point of your spiritual journey with family members and maybe people around you than probably now, where you have more of a spiritual foundation for yourself, and there's maybe more things that you can relate on with people in your life. But do you want to talk just a little bit about like your spiritual journey up to now, just how you've come to the place that you are now, and you can touch on just like how your relationship with your family has changed over the years?
Yeah, like you say, there was a lot of contention.
Yeah.
Because I was in a place of throwing everything out.
Yeah.
It took what little there was there, that, like, commonality there, and it kind of took that away as well. I was feeling more and more like we just couldn't relate. Anything that I would have to say, we just couldn't find common ground on.
Yeah.
And I had discussions where I was open about, like, just not believing in anything.
Yeah. And
believing in the goodness of people and which I still do, like, that we should be doing things for goodness sake, not for God's sake. For the reason because it is the right thing to do, not because we're being judged or because of what God thinks of us, or that we'll have to, it will get us out of something, or get us a reward eventually. But it really, the fact that I didn't believe in, like, Christianity even really scared them.
Yeah.
I think that was really hard for them to understand. And so they acted, certain people acted in ways that, out of fear.
Yeah.
And not wanting me to ever be open about what I believed.
And you and I have talked a little bit about this before, just like through people in the church's perspective, it's literally like life or death, these kinds of things. And so I think you saying that they were acting out of fear is very real, and you can see with people who are very devout, and like you and I have both been there, see, like, this is like your eternal salvation on the line. And that's like how family members see it. And that does create a lot of fear just because of the things that come, you know, you're taught in the church. Like, if you're not living a certain way, then you're not going to be with your family for eternity. And that creates a lot of fear in them wanting to kind of bring you back to the good side.
Yeah.
In that way, because they are like scared for your salvation. And I think anytime people come from a place of fear in a relationship or in any kind of discussion, it's really hard to have any kind of discourse at all, because the emotions are so strong. Mm-hmm. And it's so hard to just kind of break through that fear and be like, no, it's okay, like it's all gonna work out in the end, like you don't have to worry about me, like it's gonna be fine. Mm-hmm. At least that's how I've kind of viewed things.
Yeah totally. And it's because they loved me a lot, that they were fearful for me. But it is interesting, like, you got to be careful with how you show that love.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't always do what you think it's going to do.
Yeah.
And, but yeah, so I had, it was a very rough time. And I there were times where I was like, I might not be able to be in a relationship with my family because of how closed off I had to be around them.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Absolutely Me. Thank you to everyone who helped make this possible. Shout out to Tanner Johnson for the amazing intro. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, review, tell all your friends. And we'll be back next Friday with another episode. Love you. Bye.